The rain was falling the day Emma turned 4, and she insisted on wearing her yellow raincoat with the duck buttons to her birthday party. I can still see her spinning in our living room, arms outstretched, watching the coat flare out like a tiny umbrella. "Look, Mama, I'm a flower," she declared, and I laughed so hard I nearly dropped her birthday cake. That was Emma, always finding magic in the ordinary, always turning our small apartment into something extraordinary with her imagination. She had this way of looking at the world that made me see it differently too. Where I saw puddles, she saw mirrors for the sky. Where I saw fallen leaves, she saw nature's confetti. And where I saw an old, ratty stuffed elephant with one missing eye and fur worn thin from countless nights of cuddling, she saw her very best friend, Mr. Peanuts. That's what she called him, though I never understood why. The elephant was gray, and had never resembled a peanut in any way I could imagine. But Emma was convinced, and who was I to argue with a 4-year-old's logic? Mr. Peanuts went everywhere with her, to the grocery store, to the pediatrician, to play dates where other children eyed him suspiciously, wondering what Emma saw in this shabby old toy when there were shinier, newer options available. "Mr. Peanuts has been to space," Emma would announce to anyone who would listen. "He told me about the stars. They're not cold like everyone thinks. They're warm, like hugs." I used to worry that her attachment to that elephant was too intense, that maybe I should encourage her to branch out, make friends with other toys. But watching her whisper secrets to Mr. Peanuts in the soft glow of her nightlight, seeing how her little body relaxed when she pulled him close during thunderstorms, I realized that some loves don't need explaining. They just need protecting. The morning of the accident started like any other. Emma woke up before her alarm. She always did, as if her internal clock was perpetually set to excited about life. She padded into my bedroom in her pajamas with the cartoon penguins, Mr. Peanuts tucked under one arm, dragging slightly on the hardwood floor. "Mama, is it time for school yet?" she asked, climbing into my bed and snuggling against my side. Her hair smelled like the lavender shampoo we used, and her skin was still warm from sleep. "Not quite yet, sweetheart, a few more minutes." She was starting pre-K that year, and though she'd been excited about it for weeks, I could sense some nervousness creeping in. She'd been asking more questions lately. Would the other kids like her? What if she missed me too much? What if she forgot where the bathroom was? "Can Mr. Peanuts come to school with me today?" she asked, stroking the elephant's threadbare trunk. We'd had this conversation before. The teacher had sent home a note suggesting that comfort items stay home after the first week, to help children adjust and focus on making new friends. But looking at Emma's hopeful face, I found myself wavering. "How about this?" I said, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Mr. Peanuts can come in the car with us and he'll wait for you there. That way, he'll be the first thing you see when school's over." Emma considered this seriously, as she did all negotiations. "Will he be lonely in the car?" "I think he'll be okay. He can look out the window and watch for you." She nodded, satisfied with this arrangement, and we began our morning routine. Breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast cut into triangles because regular rectangles were too boring. Teeth brushing with the electric toothbrush that played music for exactly 2 minutes. Getting dressed, which somehow always took 3 times longer than it should because Emma had opinions about everything. The socks had to be exactly the right height. The shirt couldn't have any wrinkles, and the shoes needed to be tied in perfect bows. Through it all, Mr. Peanuts sat patiently on her dresser, watching with his one good eye as Emma prepared for her day. The drive to school was our special time. Emma would sit in her car seat behind me, chattering about whatever crossed her mind, while I navigated the morning traffic. That day, she was talking about her weekend plans. "After school, can we go to the park, the one with the big slide? I want to show Mr. Peanuts how brave I am. Last time I was scared, but I'm bigger now." "Of course we can go to the park," I said, catching her eye in the rearview mirror. She was holding Mr. Peanuts up to the window, pretending he was looking at the passing scenery. "Look, Mr. Peanuts, those are the trees where the squirrels live, remember? We saw them last time, and you said they looked like tiny acrobats." I was so focused on her voice, on the way she made everything sound like an adventure, that I almost didn't see the other car running the red light. Almost. The sound came first, a horrific screech of brakes and twisting metal that seemed to go on forever, but probably lasted only seconds. Then the impact, violent and sudden, spinning our little sedan into a direction we were never meant to go. The world became a kaleidoscope of broken glass and deployed airbags and the acrid smell of burning rubber. And then, silence. The kind of silence that feels wrong, like the world has forgotten how to breathe. I remember thinking, stupidly, that I needed to turn off the radio, even though the radio wasn't playing. I remember the spider web of cracks across the windshield and how they looked almost pretty, like ice crystals, until I remembered why they were there. Emma? My voice sounded strange, muffled and distant. Emma, baby, are you okay? No answer. I tried to turn around, but something was wrong with my shoulder, and pain shot down my arm like lightning. The car seat behind me was empty except for Mr. Peanuts, who sat there looking absurdly normal amid all the chaos, as if nothing had happened at all. Emma! I screamed, fighting against the seatbelt that had saved my life, but now felt like a cage. Emma! But she was gone. My little girl, who saw magic in puddles and believed that stars were warm like hugs, was gone. And somehow, impossibly, Mr. Peanuts remained, a gray and tattered witness to the worst moment of my life. The paramedics found me still clutching that elephant when they cut me from the wreckage. I wouldn't let go, even as they loaded me into the ambulance, even as they wheeled me through the hospital corridors where the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry insects. Mr. Peanuts was all I had left of her, and I held him against my chest like he could somehow bring her back. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and whispered condolences. People kept saying things like, "She's in a better place," and God needed another angel. But their words felt hollow, like coins dropped into an empty well. I sat in the front pew with Mr. Peanuts hidden in my jacket pocket, my fingers wrapped around his worn fabric. Sarah had wanted to put him in the casket with Emma, but I couldn't bear it. I couldn't let him go too. After the service, after the last casserole dish had been delivered and the final sympathy card had arrived, Sarah and I found ourselves alone in a house that felt too big and too quiet. Emma's room remained exactly as she'd left it that morning. Her bed unmade, her books scattered across the floor, her art supplies spread across the little table by the window. But without her laughter echoing through the halls, without her feet pattering across the hardwood floors, the house felt like a museum dedicated to a life cut short. Sarah threw herself into work, staying late at the office, taking on extra projects, anything to avoid coming home to the silence. I understood. The quiet was suffocating, filled with all the sounds Emma would never make again. But I couldn't leave. I couldn't abandon the last place where she had been alive, where her presence still lingered in every corner. I kept Mr. Peanuts on my nightstand, and every morning I would wake up and see him there, his button eyes reflecting the early sunlight. Sometimes, in those first moments between sleep and wakefulness, I would forget. I would think I heard Emma calling for me from her room, and I would start to get up to make her breakfast before reality crashed back down like a wave. The marriage couldn't survive the weight of our grief. Sarah and I loved each other, but we grieved differently, and our pain created a chasm between us that grew wider with each passing day. She needed to move forward, to find a way to live again. I needed to hold on, to preserve every memory, every trace of Emma that remained. We were both drowning, but in different oceans. The divorce was quiet, civilized. We divided our possessions, like we were splitting up a business partnership rather than dismantling a family. Sarah took most of the furniture, the wedding china, the photo albums. I kept the house and Mr. Peanuts. She never asked for him, and I never offered. Some things were too sacred to negotiate. The years that followed blurred together like watercolors in the rain. I went through the motions of living, waking up, going to work at the accounting firm, coming home to an empty house that echoed with memories. My colleagues were patient at first, understanding when I missed deadlines or stared blankly during meetings. But grief has an expiration date in the eyes of the world, and eventually, their sympathy curdled into awkward discomfort. I stopped accepting dinner invitations. I stopped returning phone calls from friends who wanted to check in. What was there to say? That I still set 2 plates at the dinner table out of habit? That I sometimes bought Emma's favorite cereal at the grocery store before remembering she wasn't there to eat it? that I kept Mr. Peanuts in my briefcase and would touch his worn fabric during particularly difficult days at work. The house became my sanctuary and my prison. I couldn't bring myself to change anything in Emma's room. Her clothes still hung in the closet. Tiny dresses and colorful t-shirts that would never be outgrown. Her books remained stacked beside her bed, stories we would never finish reading together. Sometimes I would sit on her floor and read to Mr. Peanuts, my voice cracking as I tried to do the different character voices the way she had loved. Sleep became elusive. I would lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, replaying that morning over and over. If I had left 5 minutes later, if I had taken a different route, if I had insisted she wear her seatbelt in the back instead of letting her sit in the front because she wanted to be like a grown-up. The if-onlys were endless, each one a fresh wound that refused to heal. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Martinez, a kind woman with gentle eyes who specialized in grief counseling. She had a small office filled with soft lighting and tissues, and she never seemed surprised by anything I told her. When I mentioned that I carried Mr. Peanuts with me everywhere, she didn't suggest it was unhealthy. When I admitted that I sometimes talked to Emma's picture like she could hear me, she simply nodded. Grief isn't linear, she would say. There's no timeline for healing, no right way to carry the love you have for your daughter. But even Dr. Martinez couldn't fill the Emma-shaped hole in my world. Nothing could. I tried joining a support group for bereaved parents, but listening to other people's stories of loss only amplified my own pain. I tried volunteering at the Y Children's Hospital, thinking that helping other kids might somehow honor Emma's memory, but seeing children her age laughing and playing was like pressing on a bruise that never faded. Work became my refuge, numbers and spreadsheets providing a kind of mathematical order that my emotional life lacked. I threw myself into projects, working late into the night, finding comfort in the predictability of formulas and calculations. My boss, Mr. Henderson, was understanding but concerned. He would find me at my desk long after everyone else had gone home, the office dark except for the glow of my computer screen. "David," he would say, his voice gentle but firm, "you need to go home. You need to live." But home was where the silence lived, where Emma's absence was most acute. At work, I could pretend to be functional, normal. At home, I was just a father without a child, a man haunted by the ghost of laughter that would never return. The seasons changed around me like a time-lapse film. Spring brought flowers that Emma would have picked for impromptu bouquets. Summer arrived with the kind of bright, endless days when we used to have picnics in the backyard. Fall painted the trees in colors she would have collected in her little hands. Winter wrapped the world in the kind of snow that would have sent her running, outside to build snowmen with Mr. Peanuts as the honored guest. I aged in those years, not just in the way that time naturally marks a person, but in the way that profound loss carves lines into your face and steals the light from your eyes. My hair went gray at the temples. My shoulders curved inward as if I were trying to protect my heart from further damage. People who had known me before would do double takes when they saw me, as if they couldn't quite reconcile the man I had become with the man I used to be. But through it all, Mr. Peanuts remained constant. His gray fabric had grown even more faded, his stuffing had shifted and settled, making him lopsided in a way that somehow made him more precious. He was the keeper of Emma's secrets, the witness to her dreams, the last tangible connection to the little girl who had loved him so completely. Sometimes I would hold him and try to remember exactly how Emma's hands had looked wrapped around him. Her fingers had been so small, her nails always slightly dirty from digging in the garden or finger painting. She had a habit of twirling his trunk when she was thinking, the same way some children twirl their hair. These details felt sacred, too important to forget, but also too fragile to examine too closely. 5 years passed this way, each one feeling both endless and impossibly brief. 5 years of birthdays that went uncelebrated, of Christmas mornings without the sound of wrapping paper being torn apart with gleeful abandon. 5 years of learning to live with a pain that never quite dulled, only became more familiar, like an old injury that aches when the weather changes. It was on a Tuesday in October when everything shifted, though I didn't recognize it at the time. I was walking through the park on my lunch break, something Dr. Martinez had encouraged me to do. Fresh air and movement, she would say, even when you don't feel like it. The leaves were turning, creating a carpet of gold and crimson that crunched beneath my feet. Emma would have loved this, I thought automatically, the way I thought about everything through the lens of what she would have enjoyed. That's when I heard it. A sound that stopped me cold. Laughter. Not just any laughter, but the bright, uninhibited giggle of a child completely lost in joy. I turned toward the sound and saw a little girl, maybe 6 years old, with dark curls, bouncing as she chased a butterfly that seemed determined to stay just out of reach. Her mother sat on a nearby bench, watching with the kind of relaxed attention that comes from knowing your child is safe and happy. For a moment, the sight was like a knife to my chest. The familiar surge of grief rose up, threatening to overwhelm me. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of the usual crushing weight, I felt something else, a strange, bittersweet warmth. The little girl's joy was so pure, so complete, that it reminded me not of what I had lost, but of what I had been privileged to experience. Emma had laughed like that. Emma had chased butterflies with that same determined delight. I found myself smiling, actually smiling, for the first time in years. It was small and fragile, that smile, but it was real. I reached into my briefcase and touched Mr. Peanuts, and for once the gesture didn't feel like grasping at ghosts. It felt like sharing a moment with an old friend. The little girl finally caught her butterfly, or rather, it landed on her outstretched finger, as if it had been playing along all this time. She stood perfectly still, her eyes wide with wonder, and whispered something to it before gently encouraging it to fly away. As she watched it disappear into the trees, she turned and noticed me standing there. "Did you see?" she called out, her voice bright with excitement. "The butterfly liked me." "I saw," I called back, my voice rusty from disuse in casual conversation. That was pretty special. She beamed at me with the kind of unguarded trust that only children possess, then skipped back to her mother. I watched them gather their things and leave, the mother's hand gentle on her daughter's shoulder as they walked away together. They had no idea that their simple moment of joy had cracked something open in my chest, letting in the first ray of light I had felt in years. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since Emma died. I cooked a real meal, not just heated up a frozen dinner or grabbed takeout on the way home. I made spaghetti with meat sauce, Emma's favorite, and I set the table for 2. But this time, instead of the second-place setting being a painful reminder of absence, I placed Mr. Peanuts in the chair across from me. "What do you think, buddy?" I said aloud, my voice echoing in the quiet kitchen. "Think she would have liked the sauce?" Of course, Mr. Peanuts didn't answer, but somehow the silence felt different, less empty. More like a comfortable pause in an ongoing conversation rather than the end of all conversations forever. I started talking to him more after that. Not in the desperate, one-sided conversations I had attempted in the early days of grief, but in the natural way Emma used to include him in everything. I would tell him about my day at work, about the weather, about the books I was reading. Sometimes I would even ask his opinion on things, the way Emma used to do. "Should I try that new restaurant downtown?" I might ask while getting dressed for work. "Emma always said you were good at picking places to eat." It felt less like madness and more like keeping a promise. To Emma, to Mr. Peanuts, to the part of myself that remembered how to find joy in small things. Dr. Martinez noticed the change immediately when I came to my next appointment. "You look different," she said, studying my face with professional interest. "Lighter, somehow." I told her about the little girl in the park, about the butterfly, about the way I had started talking to Mr. Peanuts again. I expected her to be concerned, to suggest that I was avoiding reality or creating unhealthy coping mechanisms. Instead, she smiled. "Grief isn't just about learning to live without someone," she said. "It's also about learning to live with the love you still carry for them. It sounds like you're finding ways to honor that love instead of just enduring its absence." Her words stayed with me as I walked home that day. Honor the love instead of just enduring its absence. It was a concept that felt both foreign and familiar, like remembering a language I used to speak fluently but hadn't used in years. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done since the accident. I went to Emma's room and really looked at it, not with the desperate hunger of early grief or the careful avoidance of recent years, but with the gentle attention of someone visiting a sacred space. Her drawings were still taped to the walls, stick figures of our family, rainbows that took up entire sheets of paper, a portrait of Mr. Peanuts that made him look more like a gray blob with eyes but captured his essence perfectly. I sat on her bed and picked up one of her books, The Giving Tree, which had been her absolute favorite. She had made me read it to her so many times that I had memorized every word. I opened it to the first page and began to read aloud, my voice steady and clear. Once there was a tree, and she loved a little boy. As I read, I could almost hear Emma's voice chiming in at her favorite parts, could almost feel her small body curled up against my side the way she used to do during story time. But instead of the crushing pain these memories usually brought, I felt something else. Gratitude. Gratitude for having had those moments, for having been loved so completely by such a remarkable little person. When I finished the book, I looked at Mr. Peanuts, who had been sitting on the nightstand all this time, patient and faithful as always. "She really loved this story, didn't she?" I said to him. "She really loved you." And in the quiet of that room, surrounded by the artifacts of a life cut short but fully lived, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 5 years. I felt peace. Not the absence of pain. The pain would always be there. I understood that now. But peace with the pain, acceptance of it as the price of having loved so deeply. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The dream had left me with more than just peace. It had given me purpose. I sat on the edge of my bed, Mr. Peanuts in my hands, and for the first time since the accident, I knew what I needed to do. I called in sick to work and spent the day going through Emma's room properly, not with the desperate clinging I'd done before, but with intention. I sorted through her clothes, her books, her toys. Some things I would keep. The drawing she'd made of our family as stick figures under a rainbow, the little ceramic handprint we'd made at a pottery class, her favorite bedtime stories. But other things, beautiful things that could bring joy to other children, those I carefully packed into boxes. The local children's hospital was my first stop. I'd driven past it countless times over the years, always averting my eyes from the pediatric wing where small patients in wheelchairs sat, by windows, looking out at a world they couldn't fully join. Now I walked through those doors carrying boxes of Emma's books, her art supplies, her puzzles and games. "These belong to my daughter," I told the volunteer coordinator, a kind woman with silver hair and gentle eyes. "She would have wanted other children to enjoy them." The woman's face softened with understanding. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. The weight of loss was something you learned to recognize in others once you'd carried it yourself. "What was her name?" she asked softly. "Emma," I said, and saying her name aloud to a stranger felt like releasing a bird I'd kept caged for too long. Her name was Emma. Over the following weeks, I found myself returning to the hospital, not just to donate things, but to volunteer. I started reading to the children in the cancer ward, my voice growing stronger with each story. These kids, fighting battles that would have broken most adults, reminded me of Emma's resilience, her ability to find wonder even in difficult moments. There was a little girl named Sophia, maybe 6 years old, who was going through chemotherapy. She had lost most of her hair, but her eyes still sparkled with the same mischief I remembered in Emma's. She loved the story about the elephant who could fly, and every time I read it, she would close her eyes and pretend she was soaring through clouds. "Do you think elephants really can fly?" she asked me one afternoon, her small hand resting on the book's cover. "I think," I said carefully, "that anything is possible if you believe in it hard enough." She nodded solemnly, as if this was the most important truth she'd ever heard. "My mama says my hair will grow back when I'm better. Do you think it will be curly like before?" "I think it will be exactly the way it's supposed to be," I told her, and I meant it. Working with these children taught me something I'd forgotten. In my grief, that love doesn't end with death. The love I had for Emma, the love these parents had for their sick children, the love these children had for life despite everything they were enduring, it was all connected, all part of something larger than any individual loss. I started attending a support group for parents who had lost children. It was held in the basement of a church, in a circle of folding chairs that had seen too many tears. The first time I walked in, I almost turned around and left. But something, maybe Emma's voice, maybe my own desperate need for connection, made me stay. There was Margaret, who had lost her teenage son in a car accident 3 years earlier. There was David, whose infant daughter had died of SIDS. There was Carmen, whose 8-year-old had succumbed to leukemia after a 2-year battle. Each story was different, but the pain was universal, and for the first time since the accident, I didn't feel alone in my grief. The hardest part, Margaret said during one session, is when people expect you to move on, as if love has an expiration date. They mean well, David added, his voice tired, but they don't understand that. We're not trying to get over our children. We're trying to learn how to carry them with us. That phrase stuck with me. Learning how to carry them with us. It wasn't about forgetting Emma or leaving her behind. It was about finding a way to honor her memory while still living, still breathing, still finding moments of joy in a world that continued to turn despite our loss. I began writing letters to Emma, something Dr. Martinez had suggested years earlier, but I'd been too raw to attempt. I wrote about my days, about the children I met at the hospital, about how Mr. Peanuts was holding up. I wrote about missing, her laugh, about wishing I could see her grow up, about all the conversations we would never have. But I also wrote about the good memories, the way she used to dance in the kitchen while I cooked dinner, spinning in circles until she got dizzy and collapsed in giggles. The time she insisted on wearing her Halloween costume to the grocery store in July because she wanted to be a princess while buying ice cream. The morning she woke up early and tried to make me breakfast in bed, resulting in a kitchen covered in flour and the smoke alarm going off. These letters became a bridge between the Emma I had lost and the Emma I would always carry with me. They helped me remember that our relationship hadn't ended with the accident. It had simply transformed into something different, something that existed in memory and love, rather than in daily presence. One evening, as I was writing one of all these letters, I looked up at Mr. Peanuts sitting on my desk. His gray fabric had faded even more over the years, and one of his button eyes was slightly loose, but he remained steadfast, a guardian of memories. "You know what, old friend?" I said to him. "I think it's time we started living again. Not moving on. Emma will always be part of us. But living. Really living. And for the first time in 5 years, that didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like a promise." The foundation grew slowly at first, like a seedling pushing through concrete. I started small, visiting children's hospitals on weekends, bringing books and small toys to kids who were facing their own battles. The first time I walked into the pediatric ward at St. Mary's, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the bag of donations. The smell of antiseptic and the sound of machines beeping brought back memories of those final hours with Emma, but I forced myself to keep walking. A little boy named Marcus was the first child I really connected with. He was 7, the same age Emma had been, with bright eyes that seemed too old for his face. He was battling leukemia, and his mother told me he hadn't spoken much since starting his latest round of treatment. When I sat down beside his bed and pulled out a worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are, his eyes lit up for the first time, in weeks, according to the nurses. "My daughter loved this book," I told him, opening to the first page. "She used to say that Max reminded her of herself when she got really angry about having to eat vegetables." Marcus smiled. Just a tiny upturn of his lips, but it was there. As I read, he gradually moved closer until he was leaning against my arm. When I finished, he looked up at me with those serious eyes and whispered, "Will you come back tomorrow?" That question broke something open in my chest, but in a good way. Like a dam that had been holding back not just pain, but also love, compassion, the desire to nurture and protect. "Yes," I told him. "I'll come back." I visited Marcus 3 times a week for 2 months. We read together, played simple games, and sometimes just sat in comfortable silence. He told me about his dreams of becoming an astronaut, about his dog Buster who was staying with his grandmother, about how scared he got during the night treatments. I told him about Emma, about her laugh and her curiosity and her absolute certainty. that grown-ups didn't understand nearly as much as they pretended to. When Marcus went into remission and was finally able to go home, his mother hugged me so tightly I thought she might never let go. "You gave him hope," she said through her tears. "When we thought we were losing him, you reminded him that there was still magic in the world." But she was wrong. Marcus had given me something far greater. He had shown me that my capacity to love hadn't died with Emma. It had just been waiting, dormant, for the right moment to bloom again. The foundation officially launched on Emma's birthday. What would have been her 10th. I stood in front of a small group of donors, volunteers, and hospital staff, holding Mr. Peanuts in my hands. My voice shook as I spoke, but the words came from a place of strength I'd forgotten I possessed. Emma's embrace isn't just about providing comfort items to children in hospitals, I said. It's about recognizing that every child deserves to feel loved, especially in their darkest moments. It's about understanding that healing isn't just medical, it's emotional, spiritual, human. My daughter taught me that love doesn't end when life does. It transforms, it grows, it finds new ways to touch the world. I looked down at Mr. Peanuts, his button eyes catching the light. This little elephant has been on an incredible journey. He's been loved by a little girl who saw wonder in everything. He's been a keeper of memories for a father learning to live with loss. And now, he's going to help us remember that every child we serve is someone's whole world, deserving of tenderness and hope. The applause was warm, but what moved me most was seeing Dr. Martinez in the back of the room, tears streaming down her face. After the event, she approached me with a smile I'd never seen from her before. "David," she said, "I've watched you for 5 years, and I've seen you survive. But tonight, for the first time, I'm seeing you truly live. Emma would be so proud." That night, I sat in Emma's room, which I had finally started calling the memory room instead of Emma's room, a small but significant shift. I placed Mr. Peanuts on the shelf next to her picture, but for the first time, it didn't feel like I was abandoning her. It felt like I was honoring her by letting her love continue to ripple outward into the world. "We're going to help a lot of kids, Em," I whispered to her photograph. "And maybe, just maybe, we're going to help their parents too. Because I'm learning that grief shared is grief transformed." The foundation's first year was challenging but rewarding beyond anything I could have imagined. We provided comfort items to over 200 children, trained volunteers in grief counseling, and started a support group for parents facing the unthinkable. Each child we helped felt like a small victory, not over grief. I'd learned that grief never truly goes away, but alongside it. The second year brought unexpected challenges that tested everything I thought I'd learned about healing. We had grown to serve 3 hospitals, and I was spending most of my time coordinating volunteers and managing donations. The work was fulfilling, but I was beginning to feel disconnected from the direct contact with children that had originally sparked my passion. It was during this period that I met Sarah Chen, a child psychologist who had been volunteering with us for several months. She was brilliant, compassionate, and had an intuitive understanding of how to reach children who had retreated into themselves due to trauma or illness. What I didn't expect was how she would challenge me to examine my own healing process. "David," she said one evening as we were organizing supplies in the foundation's small office, "can I ask you something personal?" I looked up from the inventory sheets I'd been reviewing. "Of course. When you talk about Emma, you always speak in past tense, even when you're describing her personality, her preferences, her impact on your life. Have you considered that? Maybe she doesn't have to be relegated entirely to the past?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "She's gone, Sarah. That's not something I can change." "I'm not suggesting you deny reality," she said gently. "But I work with a lot of children who've lost siblings, and I've noticed something. The ones who heal most completely are those who find ways to keep their loved ones present in their current lives, not just in their memories." That conversation haunted me for weeks. I found myself paying attention to how I spoke about Emma, and Sarah was right. I had unconsciously created a wall between my past life with her and my present life without her. It was as if I believed that moving forward meant leaving her behind, when perhaps the opposite was true. The breakthrough came through a child named Isabella, an 8-year-old girl with cystic fibrosis who had been in and out of the hospital for most of her life. She was sharp, funny, and had a way of cutting through adult pretenses that reminded me painfully of Emma. During one of my visits, she was having a particularly difficult day, struggling to breathe and frustrated with her limitations. "I hate being sick," she said bluntly, her small hands clenched into fists. "I hate that I can't run like other kids. I hate that my parents look at me like I'm going to break. I hate that everyone treats me like I'm already dead." Her words hit me like a physical blow because I recognized the anger, not just hers, but my own. I had been so focused on honoring Emma's memory that I had forgotten to celebrate her continuing influence on my life. "You know what?" I said, sitting down beside Isabella's bed. "I think my daughter would have really liked you." "Would have?" Isabella asked, picking up on my word choice immediately. "She died 3 years ago," I said. "But you're right. I said would have, like she's completely gone. The truth is, I think she does like you. I think she's the reason I'm here, the reason I started this foundation. I think she's still teaching me things every day." Isabella studied my face with the intensity that sick children often develop. "What kind of things?" "Well, today she's teaching me through you that being angry about unfair things isn't wrong. It's human. She was angry too sometimes about being sick. But she never let that anger make her mean. She let it make her fierce." For the first time since I'd known her, Isabella smiled. Fierce, I like that word. Emma would have liked it too. She was fierce about protecting people she cared about. Fierce about finding joy even when things were hard. Fierce about making sure everyone felt included. I paused, feeling something shift inside me. And I think she's still fierce about those things. I think she's working through all of us who loved her. That conversation changed something fundamental in how I approached both the foundation and my own grief. I started talking about Emma in present tense when discussing her ongoing impact. I began sharing specific stories about her with the children we served, not as memories of someone gone, but as examples of how love and courage continue to influence the world. The change was remarkable. Children responded differently when I spoke about Emma as a continuing presence rather than a past loss. They began sharing their own stories about people they'd lost, but instead of focusing only on the sadness, they talked about how those people continued to guide and inspire them. Sarah noticed the shift immediately. "You're different," she observed one day. "Lighter somehow, but not in a way that diminishes what you've been through." "I think I've been carrying Emma wrong," I admitted. "I've been carrying her like a weight when I should have been carrying her like a light." It was around this time that I made a decision that surprised even me. I asked Sarah if she would consider becoming the Foundation's clinical director, a position that would formalize her role and allow us to expand our psychological support services. But more than that, I found myself hoping she would say yes for personal reasons I was only beginning to acknowledge. "I'd be honored," she said, and then, with a smile that made my heart skip, "But I have one condition." "What's that?" "You have to promise me that you'll start taking better care of yourself. You can't pour from an empty cup, David. And lately, you've been running on fumes." She was right, of course. In my dedication to the Foundation, I had been neglecting my own needs, physical, emotional, and social. I had been so afraid that taking care of myself meant forgetting Emma that I had swung too far in the opposite direction. "Deal," I said. "But I might need help remembering how to do that." "I think that can be arranged," she replied, and something in her tone suggested she wasn't just talking about professional guidance. That evening, I sat in the memory room and had the most honest conversation I'd had with Emma since her death. I told her about Sarah, about my growing feelings, about my fear that caring for someone new might somehow diminish what we'd shared. I told her about the Foundation's growth, about the children we were helping, about how her love was multiplying in ways I never could have imagined. And for the first time, instead of feeling like I was talking to an absence, I felt like I was talking to a presence. Not a ghost or a fantasy, but the continuing reality of love that transcends physical existence. Emma wasn't gone. She had transformed, become part of the fabric of who I was and what I was building in the world. The 7th year arrived with an autumn that felt different from all the others. The leaves turned the same brilliant colors, The air carried the same crisp promise of winter, but something fundamental had shifted in how I experienced the world. I was no longer the broken man who had stumbled through those first terrible months, nor was I trying to be the person I had been before the accident. I had become someone new, someone forged by loss, but not defined by it. The foundation had grown beyond anything I could have imagined. We now operated in 12 hospitals across 3 states, had a full-time staff of 8, and had helped over 2,000 children and their families. But more than the numbers, it was the stories that mattered. Like Marcus, the 8-year-old who had been in a car accident similar to Emma's, who clutched his donated teddy bear through 7 surgeries and sent us a drawing of himself and the bear flying with angels. Or little Sophia, who had leukemia, and spent her final weeks distributing our comfort kits to other children in the ward, saying she wanted to be a helper like Emma's daddy. Each story was a thread in a tapestry I was still learning to see clearly. Emma's death hadn't been meaningless. It had been the catalyst for something larger than either of us could have been alone. The pain of losing her had carved out space in my heart that could now hold the pain of others, and in holding it, transform it into something healing. I still talked to Emma every night, but our conversations had evolved. I no longer begged her to come back or apologized for surviving. Instead, I told her about the children we had helped that day, about the volunteers who had found their own healing through service, about the parents who had discovered they weren't alone in their darkest hours. I told her about Sarah, who had become not a replacement for the love I had lost, but a new kind of love that existed alongside it. Emma would always be my first daughter, the one who taught me what it meant to love completely. Sarah was teaching me that the heart doesn't have a finite capacity. It expands to hold whatever love we're brave enough to accept. On this particular October evening, I was sitting in Emma's room, now also my office for the foundation, when I heard a soft knock at the front door. It was late, past 9 o'clock, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I made my way downstairs, Mr. Peanuts tucked under my arm, as had become my habit during evening work sessions. When I opened the door, I found a woman in her 30s standing on my porch, holding the hand of a girl who couldn't have been more than 6. The woman looked nervous, almost apologetic, and the little girl was hiding partially behind her mother's legs, peeking out with curious brown eyes. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," the woman began, her voice uncertain. "My name is Jennifer Walsh, and this is my daughter Lily. I'm not sure how to explain this, but I think we have something that belongs to you." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, faded photograph. Even in the dim porch light, I recognized it immediately. It was the picture of Emma and Mr. Peanuts that had been in his pocket the day of the accident, the one I thought had been lost forever. "We found this in our new house," Jennifer continued, seeing my stunned expression. "We just moved in last month, and Lily found it tucked behind a loose baseboard in what used to be a child's bedroom. The previous owners said a little girl had lived there before an accident. When we saw the elephant in the picture, and Lily insisted we had to find him, I did some research. The neighbors told me about you, about what happened, about the foundation you started." I looked down at little Lily, who had stepped out from behind her mother and was staring at Mr. Peanuts with wide, wondering eyes. "Is that him?" she whispered. "Is that the elephant in the picture?" I knelt down to her level, my throat tight with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart. This is Mr. Peanuts. He belonged to a very special little girl named Emma." Lily reached out tentatively and touched one of Mr. Peanuts' worn ears. "Mama said Emma went to heaven. Is that true?" "Yes," I managed. "She did. But she left Mr. Peanuts here to help other kids, didn't she?" Lily's question was so innocent, so matter-of-fact, that it took my breath away. I looked up at Jennifer, who had tears in her eyes. "Lily has been asking about the little girl in the picture every day since we found it. She's convinced that Emma wanted us to bring it back to you." Standing there on my porch, holding the photograph I thought was lost forever, with this little girl who somehow understood what Mr. Peanuts represented, I felt the final piece of a puzzle I didn't know I'd been solving click into place. Emma's story wasn't ending. It was continuing, rippling outward in ways I was only beginning to understand. "Would you like to come in?" I asked. "I think there are some stories about Emma and Mr. Peanuts that Lily might like to hear." As I led them into the house, Lily slipped her small hand into mine with the easy trust that only children possess. "Will you tell me about Emma?" she asked. "I want to know about her adventures." And as we settled into the living room, with Mr. Peanuts between us and Emma's photograph returned to where it belonged, I began to tell the story. Not the story of how Emma died, but the story of how she lived, how she loved, and how that love had grown into something larger than any of us could have imagined. The circle was complete, but it wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Another chapter in a story that would continue as long as there were children who needed comfort, parents who needed hope and love that refused to be contained by the boundaries of a single lifetime. Emma was still here, in every child we helped, in every volunteer who found healing through service, in every moment when love proved stronger than loss. She was here in Mr. Peanuts, in the foundation that bore her memory, and now in little Lily's questions and wonder. The accident had taken my daughter from this world, but it couldn't take her from the story we were still writing together. And that story, I realized, was just beginning.